Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization. Is intermittent fasting a good idea? Is it a good idea for you? Is it a good idea for your children? No, definitely not your children, but maybe for you. Intermittent fasting, the science is quite clear now. There's been lots of research. There's some not great stuff about it. There's some great stuff about it. And I have some tips at the end of this video about how, if you want to try fasting, how you can get the most out of it. So first, let's talk about what fasting probably doesn't do or makes it not so special. First, it doesn't help you lose any more weight or fat than just regular meal timing with a caloric constraint. It's all about the calorie deficit, and intermittent fasting, there's no magic about it. It's not some kind of crazy special weight loss thing. Next, it doesn't seem to have any cognition boosting effects for the average person. Some people see no difference. Some people have more mental clarity. Some people just don't have any food in their brains and they get very tired and very lack of focus, and then they can't actually do a good job. On average, no real net advantage to intermittent fasting, so don't think it's going to boost your brain health or something like that. Next, health-wise, it doesn't seem healthier than multiple daily meals throughout the day. It has another advantage, potentially, we'll talk about in just a bit on the benefits, but regular general health, if you see someone eating 4 meals a day, someone eating 1 meal a day, they can be equivalently as healthy. Another one is a lot of adherents of intermittent fasting will say it's really easy to stick to. That's just not true for most people. For most people, it's very hard to stick to because, well, you're not allowed to eat the whole day and you're starving up until you actually get to eat, and then you binge a ton of food, and it's kind of weird. It's not for everyone. It can be for some people, but it's not this hack of intermittent fasting proponents will say, oh, this is great. You'll have no hunger and all that stuff. That's true for some people, but it's definitely not true for most. And lastly, because your muscle grows and is sustained with multiple daily high-protein feedings, intermittent fasting is absolutely not ideal to grow muscle, and it is not ideal to sustain muscle. Those are the downsides, but there are upsides. Intermittent fasting might be easier for you personally to stick to if you prefer that schedule. Some people feel bogged down with food. Food is annoying for them through the day. They wake up, they have some caffeine, they go through the day, they have some more caffeine, they do a workout, they have their feasting window when they're not fasting anymore for a few hours, and then they go to sleep, and it's just hunky-dory. If that schedule works well for you, you might love intermittent fasting, and there's not a damn thing wrong with it. Next, by a small margin, and we're not positive about this, but it looks like by a small margin, intermittent fasting may be able to increase how long you live, your longevity. If that's worth it to you, and it makes sense why it would be, consider reducing your meal frequency or trying some periods of intermittent fasting to see if it's the right fit. Lastly, if you do intermittent fasting properly and you're really attentive in a way that I'll describe in the next slide, you can keep most of your muscle on your body as you diet down and lose more fat. So if you're using intermittent fasting to lose fat, which most people are, it doesn't mean you're going to lose pounds of muscle and just turn into a little twink. You probably lose mostly fat and still have an awesome muscular physique underneath if you do things properly. And what does that mean? Some of these recommendations will be to fasting, and some will be to modify fasting into almost fasting, which is a lot better than regular fasting. And here's the first one. If you want to save more of your muscle mass or even build some muscle mass as you fast, consider having protein only or mostly protein meals once or twice in the fasting period. So let's say you break your fast at 7 p.m. and you eat up until 9 p.m. and then you go to bed at like 10 or 11. That means the rest of the day you're not eating. That means you are in a position where your muscles are not exposed to the amino acids, which are breakdown products of protein, and your probability of muscle loss is decent, and your probability of muscle growth is really low because there's no raw materials. But what about this? Instead of totally pure fasting, when you wake up in the morning after a few hours, have some Greek yogurt. It's mostly protein anyway, or have a protein shake and maybe have another one later on, or have some very lean meat with some vegetables. It's almost fasting, is very few calories, but once or twice during that early part of the day, if you get a decent chunk of protein in, it can keep your muscle on your body, and it can even help you grow a little bit of muscle. Still, you get most of the health and longevity benefits of fasting because you have a very pulsatile feeding and non-feeding window, or mostly feeding, mostly non-feeding. And that way you get a lot of the advantages, but you mitigate the downsides. You don't have to do this, but it's something for you to consider. If you really want to try fasting and you like the lifestyle, but you're like, man, I work hard for my muscle, I don't want it to lose any more than I have to in a fat loss diet, this is something to think about. Next. What do you get when PhD sports scientists collaborate with pro bodybuilders? The most effective muscle growth training app ever made. Get yours now. If you are going to train with weights, which you should be, you should plan to train right before your eating window opens up. The best time to eat for weight training is right after training. And if you can get a ton of food in, which if you're intermittent fasting, you're going to get a ton of food in after training, that is precisely the time to do it. You don't want a situation in which you train in the morning and then you spend the rest of the day fasting and your muscles are like, help, we're not recovering, we're not growing. And then when they're less sensitive and less ready to grow and recover, later in the evening, you're feeding them again. So a good way to fast is to wake up, go to work, do all your things, take some caffeine before you train hard, potentially if you're tolerant of that sort of thing, really train super hard, maybe between 4 and 6 p.m. or something like that, or 5 to 7. And then at 7 p.m. or whatever, come home and your feeding window begins. It feeds your muscles a ton. It feeds your fat less than it would because your muscles soak up a bunch of the nutrients. It recovers you really well. It potentiates some muscle growth over the night. And then the next day you begin the process all over again. It aligns really, really, really well, as opposed to training some random time throughout the day in the morning and then not eating right after you train. When you are in your feasting period, when you're eating, just because you're intermittent fasting doesn't mean anything goes. You still want to eat as healthy as possible in most cases. So yeah, rice and chicken and steak and whole grain bread and tons of great healthy sauces based in oils. That's what you want to be eating, as opposed to pizza and ice cream and whatever. Even though you can have some of those things and some are okay, ideally you want to still be eating mostly healthy food. Fasting is not some hack where you're like, fuck food quality, I don't need it anymore. You got to eat high quality foods just in your feeding window. And lastly, after you're nice and full and you've started digesting, so you're not too full, that's a good time to go to sleep. Again, buttressing the idea that you should be doing your feeding window, your feasting window in the evening, so that about an hour, hour and a half after you're done eating, you go to sleep. And because you're nice and full of food, the sleep is going to be ultra high quality. You're going to get a great duration. And it's going to have all the raw materials in your bloodstream with which to recover your body, to give you energy back, to heal up your muscles, to grow them, to prevent their loss, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you eat most of your food in the morning or in midday, then by the time you get to the evening, you're falling asleep hungry, which means you can have problems falling asleep. That's bad. Your sleep window can be curtailed. You wake up too early because you're starving, and you wake up and have really crappy sleep throughout the night because you don't have enough nutrition in you. So at the end of the day, it really kind of starts to make a lot of sense to have your feeding window later in the evening, to potentiate that sleep, to potentiate that great training, and to have the best results possible. All right, that's intermittent fasting. Science explained. I feel like Jeff Nippert out here. See you guys next time.